So please give a warm welcome to educator and spoken word artist, Joseph Green.
There's a moment when I walk onto a stage or walk into a classroom, whether it be middle school, high school, elementary, college, walk into a boardroom of a million-member organization, or merely walk into my 4-year-old son's room. There's a moment where I panic and I worry about whether or not I'm going to be able to create the necessary connection with the people in that space. Because if I can't, then why did I come here? What was the reason for me choosing to speak in this space and be present in it? So I'm having that same moment right now, and it's going to motivate me, I believe, to try my hardest to reach everybody who's listening in a particular and unique way for them. The power of story is best shown through storytelling. So I'm going to jump right into the deep end here, and I'm going to do a poem, a spoken word poem to begin. And up until 3 days ago, I was going to do a completely different poem to start. But this has happened again and again and again, and it affects the young people I work with. It affects me as a black man. It affects my son as a person of color who will one day be 6'7", if the doctors are correct. And so I felt like if I was going to have an opportunity to speak at Google, which is a big deal to me, if I was going to have this opportunity to try to encapsulate within 45 minutes my life work and what that means to me, I would have to be true to the voice inside. And this is what the voice inside has to say. He's a nice guy. This poem is dedicated to my son, to all those fighting for Black lives. Today, I am doused in guilt, and I don't know what to do with these hands. Facebook and Twitter have informed me that my friends have joined together in digital solidarity to fight for our rights or your memory, or so this never happens again. Photos from the front line of our most righteous of selves, inspirational memes and hashtags. I realize this has happened before. I wonder if I listen to the recordings of your murder, will I feel anything different to me? Your life and death is no more than a Facebook update, a trending topic on Twitter, hashtag. I hope somebody is still praying for your mother. Hashtag, insert your child's name here. Hashtag, all black bodies look alike until they're murdered. I am overwhelmed by the irrational rantings of a society too busy arguing about whether or not black lives are important enough to fight for, to actually fight for black lives. But as I stand here ranting, I realize it's because I don't know what to do with these hands that must hold and protect my son. They are not bulletproof. They are made of the same brown material that have seen so many murdered. But before I bow at the altar of suburban flight, I realize that somewhere somebody is still crying for you, that somewhere a black mother is gathering all the suspicious clothing her children own, dressing the scarecrow in the front yard, and burning our post-racial society in effigy, that somewhere a black female is being followed into Macy's on suspicion of being black, that somewhere, hands up, please don't shoot, that somewhere, why did you shoot me? You told me to get my ID, that somewhere, please don't shoot, it's only a, that somewhere, I'm sorry my music is too loud for you to hear, my humanity, that somewhere, we still can't breathe, that somewhere, they are toasting the man who did this to you, and the clans are gathering. Only this time, they won't be wearing hoods. They'll be dressed in suits, cloaked by law, charged with progressing the doctrine that if you do not look like you belong here, you can be murdered. That if you look like you belong here, you can be murdered. I will not always be able to protect my son. I pray that by then, black children in fear, black women and violence, black queer and assault, black trans and endangered, black male and thug, black bodies and deceased are no longer synonyms. At night, when I take my 4-year-old son's clothes off, I say, "Hands up, Henry." He thinks we are playing a game. I pray that when his time comes, he will know what to do with his hands. Thank you. So what's the story behind that poem? I feel like I could have started this presentation in many ways. I could have said, "Hi, my name is Joseph Green," and I could have added to the resume of things that I've accomplished. But I feel like in our society, part of the problem is that we start most conversations as if what we do is who we are. And as somebody who works with young people on a regular basis to create spaces where they can share story and believes that story is the strongest fiber connecting us as people, and nowadays the most neglected fiber connecting us as people, I thought it would be important to be vulnerable first, right? And say that I wrote that poem out of the greatest fear I've ever known. I wrote that poem because I was afraid that if I didn't tell my story, that I would be complicit in my son's death if something were to have ever happened to him. And that means not that everybody should find a stage like this to speak, but that everybody has a story to share, and there are spaces where it's appropriate to share. This is what I do. I have trained myself to be a presenter of thoughts and ideas in a multiplicity of spaces. And sometimes I think when I get into these spaces and say, "You should do this," or like learning how to share your story is so important that people think I mean like this, when I mainly mean in conversation, when I mainly mean over Thanksgiving dinner, when I mainly mean for young people in spaces where inappropriate things are being said, but they're afraid to speak out because of being ostracized. When I grew up in Northern Virginia, I grew up in a primarily white space. And what that creates is an opportunity for you to sympathize inappropriately on the behalf of people who don't necessarily need your sympathy or deserve your sympathy, which is to say that I went around apologizing for all of the white people in my life because I had good friends, which meant that, oh, these people must have within them the same thing that my friends have, even though there were times when my friends called me out of my name, but they were my friends. They were only friends that I knew, even though my first college girlfriend's family suggested that they would take her out of school if she continued to date me, even though, and I kept making apologies because I hadn't taken the time to discover my story as a black person in America. And it's not the only thing I identify as. Obviously, I'm a male, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I'm a poet, but it's one of the things that identifies me before anything else does. So obviously, it's very important in how I see and reflect myself in society. And so I originally wrote that poem as a middle finger to people who were only using social media to protest this issue. I wrote the poem before my son was born. So all of that stuff about my son was added 2 years later. I wrote the poem 2 weeks after Trayvon Martin was murdered. It was a challenge from a friend of mine who was tired of the type of writing that I did, which is basically family and relationships and women and things of that sort, things that I felt safe in because I had not taken the time to examine what my role was in America as a black man How dare I bring that up as a topic in my writing and my poetry? And so I wrote the poem. I was lucky enough to be on a team from DC that represents DC at the National Poetry Slam that happens in a different city every year. It was actually in Oakland the year that I went. And I was challenged by my teammates to do something that I'd been challenging young people to do for a decade at that point, which was to strip away your hate and your anger and your fear and and that which you use to protect yourself from making sincere connection with the world, and talk to me about the thing that scares you the most. Put that in this poem, put that in front of people, and see what type of reaction you get. That is the very essence of what I do for a living. Back in DC, I started an after-school creative writing program, nonprofit called Poetry Now. I ran it for 5 years, and then I was asked to work at a place called Split This Rock, which is poetry and social justice, smushed into one. They've been doing it for 10 years. They've had youth programs for 5. I had programs at 14 schools in Virginia. They had programs in 12 to 15 schools in DC. We merged them together, and now my job is director of youth programs for Split This Rock. And people ask me, do I think poetry can save the world? Because you speak of it so passionately. And I think about that poem that I just did for you guys. And I think about at this point, hundreds of thousands of people that I've performed it for. And the work that it's gotten on the internet and the response. It was picked up by PBS. It was put onto their website. And the spaces where I've gone, I've done that poem in middle schools in Northern Virginia where it's nothing but young white people in the audience. I've done that in middle schools in DC where there's nothing but young black people in the audience. And the conversations that come from both of those spaces would not have come if I had not been willing to present myself in that space, in that way rather, in that space. And so when we talk about how do we get one another down to have a conversation where we're not screaming and yelling facts and beliefs, I think it starts with story. And I've seen it happen time and time again. We sponsor an event called the Hyper Bowl. It's a clever name. I came up with it. Think about it. You're not laughing, so I'm assuming it didn't click yet. But that's okay. It's all right. No, maybe it's just not funny. Hyper Bowl is a play off the word hyperbole. We are the great. There you go. There you go. All you Googlers out there. The idea is, though, we bring together 100 to 200 young people into one space. And these young people have been working on poems for about a year in their individual clubs. And they don't realize how much they have in common with one another. And in DC, I don't know what would be comparable here, but in DC, you have DC, Maryland, and Virginia. We call it the DMV. Very different populations of people in all 3 of those places. We purposely go out of our way to bring people from all of those spaces together to tell their story to one another. We do it through poetry. Some people do it through song. Some people do it through painting. Some people do it through forensics, which is speech and debate and so on and so forth, but we do it through poetry. And we find it to be a very powerful tool. And so they get together, and it's a competition. It's also social justice workshops. It's also an open mic, and it's also an opportunity for one of them to win a scholarship. But above all of that, it's one day where they are asked to share what's most important to them. They're given space to do it. It's at George Mason University, right? So just imagine you're a young man who's never been off his 3 blocks in DC, and you're transported in the middle of George Mason University, and there are all of these people, and they're all saying, oh my God, your story, it's amazing, it moves me. And I can see now for the first time that behind what is presented to us on the news, what's behind the fear that drove our parents to move out here to the burbs in the first place, behind the media and movies and songs and all of the things that hit the mainstream, you're just a dude. And you like comic books. And I like comic books. Now, you live in a pretty crappy neighborhood. Why is it crappy? Do I have anything to do with that? Does my privilege have anything to do with creating that space? Or can I use my privilege to deconstruct that space? Why are we so far apart when geographically we are so close together? That's the power of story to transform lives. These young people become doctors and lawyers and activists. You know, I am not someone who is a proponent of putting more poets into the world. I have enough competition as it is. And someone once said, and I can't remember it, but if you don't have anything new to add to poetry, poetry doesn't need you, right? So we're good. There's some people who have to be in it, and I welcome them in the space, but I think what we're trying to create are poetically minded people, right? And I will get into this a little later when I have my little graph up, but the idea that poetry, storytelling, art in general is a way to put down what's going on in your life into a space in front of you and edit it and share it and make it a useful tool as opposed to the weight that a lot of our trauma and a lot of things that happen in our life present themselves as. And it's not just for people who are good at it, which is the other thing. We'll get to that later. So my name is Joseph Green. I am the director of youth programs at Split This Rock in DC. I am also a professional spoken word artist and motivational speaker, whatever that means. I'm also a person who is in long-term recovery. And when I talk about poetry saving lives, this is the example that I give. So I'm going to do another poem for you all after I take a drink of water, because this is a lot of talking. And then I'm going to tell you the story of the poem. How are y'all doing? Are we good? So far, so good? Cool. Awesome. I'm assuming that everybody out there is also nodding at their desk. I appreciate whomever. It's funny because like I'm looking off into the, as if they're all there. This poem is called Talk Ugly. The last time I saw you alive, I wish I would have talked ugly to you. Said, put the straw down. No, I don't want to take another line. I should be writing them. My friend, you are a composer of music and magic. Instruct your limbs to serve a purpose greater than self-indulgence. Do not be fooled into thinking your pain has sharper teeth than anyone else's. I had a chance, but said nothing because I was high. This is how I got started. A bottle of Jack and a mirror. Memories and scissors, dreams drenched in ether, sliced by razors, potential roll like $20 bills, numbing the feeling on the tip of my tongue that I or this tongue should be serving a greater purpose. In a last-ditch attempt at self-assessment, I decided to look at my life through the eyes of loved ones, for they see everything, especially the ugly. From years of drug use, from lying with to lying to angels, friends I had forsaken, taking so much more than I had given, I had streamlined self-centeredness into a science. But there was a righteousness there, a willingness to craft these ills through alchemy and poetry and to a seer's stone. But honestly, how could I speak ugly to you when I was yet to speak it to myself? In these nightmares of hindsight, there is no poetry, no alliterations to soften the blow. Some realities have no simile. Truth is like truth. How could I form my lips to call your suicide a tragedy when I left you alone in that room? Accompanied by narcotics and 1,000 ghosts draped in your disappointments. I can imagine all the voices you heard, all but mine. Smear makeup onto disgust if you must. Trust the truth is seldom pretty, but she is always beautiful. It is in times like these that I need you to please talk ugly to me. My pain needs it Too many times we caress sadness when it needs to be shaken, torn from its place of comfort, forced to grow wings to survive or die. Just don't tell me I can grow up and be whatever I want. Tell me that whatever I want better be something I am willing to achieve, that dreams will dissipate under the weight of addiction, and that there is a distinct difference between living like a rock star and actually being one. Sometimes, no matter how many poems you've written, you are just a cokehead and a poser. Fear not. We are all divinely flawed individuals, perfectly ugly. There's no point in hiding behind pretty lies. We are the sum of the hideous scars that hold together the remainder of our pretty pieces. The last time I saw you alive, the last time I saw you alive, the last time I saw you alive, I wish I would have talked ugly to you. It would have been the most beautiful thing I never said. Thank you. So here's one of a million examples of how poetry has saved lives. So I did a lot of drugs when I lived in New York. And I had a few friends, and we rolled in the same circle, and we became thick as thieves, or thick as drug users. I don't know what the phrase is, but you understand what I'm getting at. I was fortunate enough to have still a close relationship with my family, which is to say that I really wasn't talking to them, but they were still talking to me, so I knew in the back of my head, behind all of the damage and the drugs and the fear and the guilt and the shame, that my family was still there. My friends didn't have that same thing. About 3 years into it all, I hit what we call in the biz the proverbial rock bottom, and I went back home to DC. My father was a recovering alcoholic, helped me into recovery, and not just, physically, here you go, but like through his life and his story, and the fact that he had overcome this demon in his life. His life was a statement of inspiration. A year later, I get a phone call. My friend John committed suicide in a hotel room. And I went back up to the funeral. And as is too often the way in this space, when we have lost one of our own, those of us who suffer from substance use disorder, we tend to mourn by doing the same thing that killed the person that we loved, right? So it's go to the funeral, go to the bar, go to someone's house, snort it away, shoot it away, drink it away. After the funeral, I had a choice. Do I go to the bar, even though it's been a year now? Or do I go back to my hotel room? I had this line in my head. If I had only talked ugly to you. I've been a writer for a while, so every once in a while you get a line that sticks in your head and it's just there and it's gnawing at you and it's annoying and you don't know where it's going to go. I decided to go back to my hotel room. Sorry, dramatic pause over. And I wrote the first draft of this poem that I just read for you, which is, when I first wrote it, it was 6 pages long. And I believe that, there's no way to prove this. There was a crossroads there. I had been exposed to art, the transformative power of art, enough that I was able to make a decision that I think saved my life. I don't know if I would have used that night and OD'd or whatever, because that's typically what happens. You go a long period of time, you mess up, you go back, and your body can't handle it. But I didn't, so there you go. It goes further than that, though. I didn't just sit on it, right? I took the poem to a friend of mine. He helped me edit it. I presented it at a poetry competition. It did well, but that's not what was important. What was important is the young lady who came up to me afterwards and said, I haven't known what to do about this situation that I'm in. I have a friend who's using, and she's going too far. Thank you for telling me your story, because now I know what to do. I want to be very clear about this. For everybody who has lost somebody, there's no guarantee that saying something will change what happened. But the inverse of that is also true. There's no way of knowing if you had said something, what change it could have made. And so when given that sort of logical argument, you move forward, you do the thing. And that has repeated itself 100,000 times since. That one poem got heard by this group of people who told that group of people, and now I have the privilege to go around the country and share my story based on this poem that I wrote a decade ago. It saves my life every time I do it. It reminds me of what's at stake. And hopefully it has been used as inspiration to people who do this work to keep at it, because there's very little reward in it. And for those who are actually suffering, young people, to make a change or make a choice or make a decision or do something about it. But now that speaks to my work now. How does that speak to my work now as an educator? I think any demographic is its own best advocate for whatever it is that's ailing that demographic. For example, my poem is powerful, I like to think. It is twice as powerful coming out of the mouth of someone who you believe is going through a similar time of life or a similar understanding of the world as you are. So empowering young people, if the last month in America hasn't proven to you what happens when young people are fed up and have had enough and are speaking to each other and are making things happen regardless of whether or not we give them permission to do so. There's a lot of things that we can talk about as far as this movement coming out of Florida. You know, I was honored enough to speak at a local march a week before, and I spoke about the intersectionality of race and gun violence and how it was super important for us to bring all that stuff to the table. And that argument and that conversation needs to happen. But the fact of the matter is, this population who we often write off as being so self-absorbed to not actually be able to do anything other than worry about themselves, have created this space where now a generation of young people, right? It's a long game, right? It's not like, 2018, are there enough of them going to be able to vote that they change, the landscape of politics? I don't know, but I know now that there are millions more young people on notice that are paying attention, that will register to vote, that understand social activism to be a part of the contract of being a citizen of a country. And that is powerful. And they did it with words, right? They did it by speaking to one another. They did it by sharing their stories. If you look at the footage of the march, most of those presentations were stories of what happened to them. Not statistics, even though they were there. It was story, because that is what gets the metric moving. You can sit next to someone and say, this many people died from gun violence. And the reaction is because it's hard to put humanity into numbers. You can sit next to somebody and say, this is how my son died, or this is how I almost died, or this is what's happening in my neighborhood. This is the fear that I feel, and I look like your daughter, and I look like your son. How would you react? And now it puts them on blast, as we like to say. I don't know who the we is. I like to say, put them on blast, to where they have to address the humanity and choose to ignore it or not, right? And that's something else. It gets to people's real motives and things, because how can you sit next to someone who is opening themselves up, who is crying, who is broken, and say, no, I still think the thing that broke you is more important than how you feel right now, right? That's motivation is coming from somewhere else. I'm getting a little bit off track, but that was a really important thing for me to talk about because it's happening right now. I thought that it would be appropriate for me to bring an example of how my young people, I like to think of them as my young people, how the young people I work with have taken their story and created it into a tool for advocacy, a tool for change. And so I have a video that I'm going to present. If you're watching out there, you want to hang on. This is going to be an amazing video. Whatever you thought of what I just did, these young people do it 10 times better. And so we're going to get on that technical side of things, and we're going to make this happen. Instead, I'm going to end with one last poem before we get into the Q&A. And I wasn't expecting to do this poem, except for, if you were here at the beginning, this was the poem I was going to do to start. And it's a sweeter poem. You might even laugh. In a dream, I saw the adolescent version of myself leaning against the wall at a middle school dance. Appearing nervous with our head down, he seemed wanting, if not needing, of some advice. I pulled out a napkin, composed a letter, a literal self-help manual, slipped it into my own prepubescent hand, looked down and read, "Dear me, dance." Though you will not be good at it until your early 20s. Bear witness to how solar systems are created within the orbits of thighs, how stars always seem to burn out but shine on. As you two-step through the universe, don't forget to breathe. If she approaches, it was meant to be. If not, Big Dipper or supernova, you will discover painfully that the wonder behind dancing, like love, is not solely predicated on the idea that you will always have another there to do it with you. You will often find that you are doing dancing and loving alone, but don't you dare stop. Dear me, or best friend an imaginary turtle could have. Pick a job, a trade, a hobby, anything, just not only art. I'm hungry. And while this poetry is feeding my soul, the rest of me is famished. Dear me, or future obsessive compulsive, you have an addictive personality. Do not try drugs. You are going to like them a lot. They will cause you to forget, to lose things. Most of which the universe will never see fit to give you a second chance with, all of which will break your mother's heart. Dear me, or would-be knight in shining armor, there are monsters underneath your father's bed. Those videotapes and magazines are not manuals. Only the wrong kind of people will want to be treated that way. Yes, there's such a thing as the wrong kind of person. You will have hand in creating some. Warning, the people labeled broken on arrival cannot be saved. Just loved and accepted as you will one day hope to be. Joseph, put down the blade, lower the heat in the shower. Pins are not tourniquets, paper a poor Band-Aid. It will be years before poetry will attempt to yellow sun, red cape, Superman save you. Stop it now. Your soul will heal long before those scars do. Dear four-eyed oracle, some wounds won't heal magically with mother's kiss. Won't make sense for years to come. This is just a writing exercise. There's no sense in it all. If I could actually give you life and a manuscript, the instructions would simply read, only change the parts where you hurt people. Everything else is miracle. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? You grow up to be me, a shattered but mending, sometimes unemployed, literary freestyle specialist with a vampire's thirst for the universe's lifeblood. And young man, I have loved you all along. Sincerely, Joseph LMS Green. Thank you. I am also that guy with his face plastered on his own website.
Hi, my name's Anaya. I'm 17 years old, and my poem is called Dependence. The girl in my math class thinks the best way to go is by her own hand. Says she wants to wear a noose like a necklace and know how it feels to have sadness dance by her bedside. I want to lend her mine. to give her the bits of this brokenness and let her try it on like secondhand sweater, feel the weight of every suicide note on her chest and show her how it feels to make breathing a chore, make her rethink making this seem less burden and more beauty. But who am I to judge her when I'm still writing my sickness in present tense? As if depression and I still be lovers entangled beneath my bed sheets instead of a distant darling that smells like yesterday's dirty laundry, the kind I never bothered to do anyways because for once something smelled worse than the stench of death I grew far too fond of, because what else would you expect someone who is already dead to smell like? And maybe I like being sick, maybe it makes me feel interesting or feel anything at all because the numbness is enough to drive me crazier than they already think I am. I'd rather be suffering than stoic, and maybe that makes me a masochist for wanting to die just to feel alive, just to feel at all. And is it still relapse when you never really recovered? When you threw away the razors but didn't stop hurting yourself, just learned to make scars that don't show up on skin? Is it still relapse when you're doing it because you love yourself? Because your body believes it's bloodshed, a sacred kind of beauty, thinks you more martyr than murder? Is it still self-harm when it doesn't hurt anymore? When it's so easy to want to stop breathing, it's like breathing, still self-harm when you like it. When it feels good to feel this bad, still bad. When it's more security blanket than sickness, feels safe in its grasp because you know if you go, it'll be by your own doing. Without it, you are a glass half empty, and it's no fun having a head above water when you are used to being so full of sadness you're drowning. And when the girl in my math class says she wants to know how it feels to be suicidal, will want to lend her my sadness, but won't. Because after all, what am I without it?
Hi, my name is Lauren, and the name of my poem is So Far Gone. 3 teenagers, squished into the back seat, cloudy. The blunt is finally passed, and ash falls, burns a hole in her sweatshirt. She doesn't notice. She wonders, just how far gone are you when you know how to manipulate the backseat of a car better than your confidence? Just how far gone are you when you can read minds and take orders before they are even spoken? Just how far gone do you have to be before you realize you're going in the wrong direction? See, nobody ever asks after the kids who familiarize themselves with the contours of a backseat, or the kids who can twist and bend our bodies to angles too acute and obtuse to ever be considered, right? Nobody ever asked how corrupted their minds have to be to feel at home in the confines of a clouded car. Nobody ever asked about the correlation between drug use and sexual assault, smoke and ashes, liquid submission. How far gone do they have to be? How far gone was I, that I couldn't bear to lift a hand, kick a leg, in defiance? How far gone are you when your body feels like noodles in the hands of a 2-year-old? Putty, clay, ready to be molded and folded, real boy turned Pinocchio. Lifeless limbs, soulless stares, heavy hands, liquid lust, still smoke. Nobody ever asks of the kids so depressed that they get high just to balance out their lows so backseats are all they know. How far gone do they have to be before somebody realizes that they are not doing this for fun? Memorizing contours and controls of backseats, taking orders before they are spoken, too far gone to protest. How far gone do we have to be for somebody to send help? How far gone will we be when somebody finally sends help?
I think I wrote this poem for 2 reasons. One was to sort through and kind of figure out all the things that I was feeling in regards to my own mental health. And the second was because I feel like it's so important for not only youth, but youth of color to hear poems like this about mental health, to kind of release the stigma around it, because in the African American community especially, it's something that's not talked about. You keep it kind of hush-hush, you keep it in the closet. You know, they tell you, like, go to church, pray about it. Like, I wanted to write this poem to give not only myself a voice, but other people a voice for what might be going on inside of their head. I think one big correlation between addiction and substance abuse and mental illness, especially when it comes to youth, is sometimes when we say things about the way that we're feeling, we're not taken seriously. So we want to take it into our own hands and to make this feeling go away in any way possible that we can. So you start finding things, anything to take away how you're feeling. And I equate addiction a lot of the time with self-harm, because people look at it and they're like, oh, they're doing that to doing that to take away the pain. But I think addiction is the same thing. Kids who are self-medicating using pot or like prescription drugs are doing the exact same thing that kids who are self-harming are doing. It's us trying to do whatever we can to take away those feelings that we're feeling when people aren't listening to us.
So yeah, those are two of the young people that I work with, and I think those poems speak for themselves. And if you add what I said earlier about what the work does when people see it, you realize why it is important for those poems to be coming out of those bodies to the people who are talking, to the young people who are listening. Telling a young person not to do drugs, bad things will happen. Well, it wasn't effective for me. And so I can imagine, and I know from work in these spaces that it's not effective for them, but to hear someone who has gone through it, who is 2 years older than you and is brave enough to come out and say this in front of a group of people, the goal is hopefully we can prevent people from having to live it to know it. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for a very powerful and authentic presentation.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Wanted to start with a question that really talks about intersectionality. You gave us so much of your personal self and very freely were vulnerable and shared your personal story. And so it prompted me to want to talk to you about the intersectionality between our self-talk about what happened between like last year and this year. What do people normally do? And you wrestled in your self-talk with what choice were you going to make? Were you going to go to the bar, or were you going to go to your hotel?
Yeah.
But then you also told your story.
Yeah.
And I think that both of those are in play, but there's an intersection between the story we tell ourselves and actually telling our story.
Yes. Okay. So to sum it up as quickly as possible, to fit in more, this is me telling myself so I don't speak too much because I tend to talk too much. Once you have your story, anything of real value can only fulfill its potential when it's shared. You think of love, you think of wisdom, you think of joy. All of those things are great when you have it, but they're best when they're shared in communion, right? And so the same thing with, all right, I have this voice in my head telling me to try to do the right thing. How did that voice get there? Well, it got there because other people around me at some point in time had implanted it through lessons, through me just seeing things happen or whatever. The purposefulness of the conversation with my father, the intentionality behind the parts of his life that he then opened up and shared with me, those were all there forming that voice. And so that was wisdom that other people had that they shared, and it came to fruition for me in that moment when I was able to make that decision. And so, you know, when you work with young people or you have children, you realize that you aren't going to be there to make the decision for them, right? So when they get there, you want them to have every tool possible. And if knowing that you had already been there would be a deterrent from them making the decision, then you have an obligation to share that you were there. You know, not necessarily in a spoken word poem, but just a conversation or in front of your classroom or wherever it is. And I think our society is made worse by the misconception that professionalism means no vulnerability and no openness to one's true self. You know, people work in cubicles for 20 years beside someone who's could be from the same town that they're from, but they never have a conversation about that. They never, because that's not supposed to happen in the workplace. Well, I spend 60 hours at work a week. If I'm not meeting people, if I'm not connecting with other human beings in that space, when am I doing it? And the same thing for young people. Like, my son is in school 40 hours a week. If they're not teaching him how to connect with other young people and seek truth and connectivity through sharing your own story, then they're just teaching them how to take tests. And that's, I think, a disservice to our humanity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Last week at Google, we had Dr. Brene Brown here, who does research in the field
Yeah,
of
very
vulnerability.
familiar.
And she described vulnerability as uncertainty, taking risk, and emotional exposure. And you represented all of that for
Well,
us here today.
I wished one day that her and I can be in the same room and I can say thank you for what her work has done for me. It wasn't so much that she presented it and I was like, oh, vulnerability. It was, she allowed me to put a name to it, and the easier I can access it and reference it, the easier I can give it to other people. And so I really appreciate her work and what she does. So it's cool that anything I do, like, brought her name up in your head.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it also made me think as I was listening to that about vulnerability, and certainly you gave us a lot of exposure into your emotions and into your life. And a lot of people use the spoken word as an outlet. So it's something that they do on the side as a way to nurture and do self-care. What do you do for self-care? What's your outlet?
So meditation. It seems so simple, but practice, having a practice of anything, whether it's yoga or kickboxing or whatever, meditation, having a consistent thing over and over again, it brings you back down to earth when the world is, trying to tether that string with all of the stress and BS that is everyday life. I try not to flirt with the idea of, with greater meaning, why are we here, so on and so forth. But it allows me to look at the battles that are right in front of me and say, okay, come back to yourself, humble yourself, relax yourself so that you can be the best version of yourself to continue to do this work, because it's bruising, right? Whenever you help someone else with their trauma, you expose yourself to that trauma, and therefore it becomes a traumatic experience for you also. And I think people who do this work sometimes most times find that out the hard way. There's like, they wanted to do it their whole life, they've been in social work for 3 years, and all of a sudden they're burnt out and they can't do anything about it anymore, and they can't feel anymore. I think I hit that road maybe 5 years ago, and then mindfulness, Buddhism, all of those things came into my life, and that's how I take care of myself. And to try to spend as much time with the people I love as I possibly can.
So recently, there have been incidents in places from Sacramento to Parkland that have impacted families and young people to create movements like March Our Lives that you referenced. How are the kids you work with using these to create movements to change our world, and how can adults engage and support our children?
Okay. So what we do in DC with Split This Rock and the spoken word movement that we have in DC is not new, right? We're not the only organization in America doing it. And I can think of 15 in California alone. Resources speak volumes, right? So I have young people who do poetry slams, and they look out in the audience and they see 5 adults. Before I came here, the day before I came here was our Grand Slam final. The 5 young people, they've been part of, hundreds of young people who've been trying to get to this one little space. And the adults in the room gave validation to their experience, right? They also paid to get in. So that helps also to allow them to go on this trip now to the Brave New Voices competition that's sponsored by the Youth Speaks, which is out of the Bay Area. And it's that, right? When we talk about what are the revolutionary things that we can do on a daily basis. It's not always destroying or tearing something down, even though that is necessary and a natural part of existence. But the conversations that they have, the creativity that is shared, and doing everything they can to create these spaces and then back up, right? I create space, I bring in facilitators who talk about social justice issues, and then I go away, right? And I let what's going to happen in that space happen. And then when the young people come to you and say, I have this idea, well, how can you help make that idea come to fruition, right? And I think the March for Our Lives is a great example of that. Young people had an idea, they didn't have the money to do it, they had the idea, adults gave them the support that they could, the years of wisdom and experience and resources, and they were able to make this idea happen, and they got out of the way. And look what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm curious to know, something I really connect with you is sharing like an authentic voice and story. I'm wondering if you've ever kind of wanted to release a poem or didn't because it kind of affected someone else in your life. Because I feel a lot of the messaging is share your story, and I wanted to share certain things, and then people are like, well, you know, if you're in a bad relationship or someone in your family has hurt you, how do you know to like cross that line of sharing versus you might really hurt someone in your life?
That is a very great question, and something that I have dealt with directly. So I alluded to my father earlier. I have a poem that's just about our relationship, and how I ran into addiction, running away from the broken man that I had saw growing up, and how him seeking recovery, when I needed it, he was there for me, right? So it ends well. But to do that, I had to expose certain things about him that members of our family didn't know. Yeah. And I think that there's two things. One, you always have to measure for yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Mm-hmm. The juice for me in this space was the lives that I think I've affected and maybe even partially been part of the saving of, because I was willing to put that story out there. I remember the night he saw it the first time. I did it for him at an event. My parents don't come out to a lot of my events. The spoken word world isn't really where they hang out. They're church folks. But they do support when they can. So he came out and said, Dad, I've been doing this poem. I feel kind of bad that I haven't done it in front of you or shared it with you. So I gave him a book with it in it. And then I did the poem in front of this place of 200 people. And in that moment, he cried and gave me a hug, and it was beautiful. Fast forward 6 months, I'm at a different event. Somebody records it. They ask if they can put it online. It's going to go to some people who do this work, and they can use the poem, maybe 600 people or so. It gets picked up by, not BuzzFeed, somebody else, one of those things, and it goes viral. And all of a sudden, he's getting phone calls from family members. Did you know your son put this out about you? And then it became a problem. And then he read the comments underneath the poem. And I think that's where his anger went, right? I think that if you've messed up in your life at some point in time, and you know that there are going to be people who are made better or made whole by hearing your story, if your heart is in the right place, you learn how to suck it up. You know, you realize that this is a good thing. That being said, I've seen it go both ways. It's your story, though. And we can't interact with people in this world assuming that if I do something bad, they're never going to say anything about it. Because that's two wrongs, right? That's the wrong of me doing the thing, and then the wrong of me hoping that you don't share it, which means that you have to sit on this thing that I did to you. Yeah. And that's not fair. So as long as it's your story and you're not using it to purposely defame someone, I think you have to do it. Personal. Juice worth the squeeze, though.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Google. We so appreciate your being here. I know it was about 18 months to get you here. How do we stay in contact and continue the conversation?
Yes, so I would love for everyone who's out there listening right now to just find me online. You can go to my website, and it's lmsvoice.com. as in last man standing, lmsvoice.com, or it's Joseph LMS Green on all social media. I do my best to post stories of the young people that I work with. I do my best to tell the experiences that I'm going through. I use my social media to hopefully bring joy, because I feel like that's the most important thing that I can give. I've fought so hard to get it and to share it, so that's what you would be, getting if that's the case. And also, if you're a person out there who works with people who you think could benefit from the work that we do, if you shoot me an email through my website, we have an online curriculum at Split This Rock that is free for everybody, and I will send you the link to that. And it's hundreds of workshops and writing prompts and ways to start clubs and movements in your own community. So either one of those things, please be in touch.
Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thank you. And thank all of you.